What does betrayal look like in the modern NHL? That's the question I want you to sit with for a moment. Because right now, somewhere in the depths of the hockey rumor mill, there's a narrative being spun that feels less like journalism and more like sacrilege. We're talking about Sidney Crosby, Captain Canada, Mr. Pittsburgh, the man who is the Penguins, potentially wearing the blue, blanc, et rouge of the Montreal Canadiens. The very idea should make your blood boil, or at least make you pause and ask, have we completely lost our minds? Let's rewind exactly 12 months. Sidney Crosby, at 37 years old, put his signature on a contract extension that would carry him through the 2026-27 season in Pittsburgh. $8.7 million against the cap. Full no-movement clause. The message was crystal clear. This is where I finish my story. But here's the thing about the NHL. It's a league where sentiment and spreadsheets wage constant war, where loyalty gets crushed between the boards of business reality. And despite that ink being barely dry, despite nearly 2 decades of black and gold bleeding through Crosby's veins, the whispers won't stop. Montreal, Montreal, Montreal. Frank Saravalli of Bleacher Report recently appeared on Sportsnet's Big Show and dropped what can only be described as a tactical nuke into this conversation. His words were carefully chosen, measured, the kind of statement that gives you comfort before ripping it away. I simply don't think it's really crossed Sidney Crosby's mind to leave the Penguins, as far as I know. Breathe easy, right? Wrong. But 2 things, Saravalli continued, and you could almost hear the collective intake of breath across the hockey world. First, it's going to have to be on his terms. He's going to have to ask the Penguins. They're not going to ask if he has interest in moving. And second, it's going to have to be for a really special situation and scenario. Let that marinate. We're not discussing a franchise shopping its legend. We're discussing a scenario where the legend himself would have to walk into the GM's office and say, it's time. The organization that drafted him first overall in 2005, that he led to 3 Stanley Cups, that he's carried through injuries and rebuilds, they would never initiate this conversation. This would be Crosby's decision, and his alone. So, what makes Montreal this really special situation? Why does this particular rumor have legs when dozens of others have died on the vine? For anyone who's studied Crosby's roots, the connection isn't manufactured. The Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia native grew up in a culture where the Montreal Canadiens aren't just a hockey team, they're a cathedral. 24 Stanley Cup banners, a history that reads like mythology, names like Richard Beliveau Lafleur and Roy etched into the very foundation of the sport. For a player with Crosby's historical consciousness, his deep respect for the game's traditions, the allure of joining that lineage isn't entirely fantastical. Add to that Montreal's recent trajectory under Martin St. Louis, a young core developing nicely, a system taking shape, the unmistakable feeling that something is being built, and you can start to see the outline of a narrative. A 38-year-old legend, a rising contender, relatively close to home. One final chapter in a storied career, written in one of hockey's most iconic venues. It's romantic, it's compelling, it's also probably complete nonsense. Let's talk cold, hard numbers, because this is where fantasy crashes into the brick wall of salary cap reality. Crosby's current deal carries that $8.7 million cap hit through 2027 with significant signing bonuses baked in. That's not astronomical by superstar standards. We live in an era where mid-tier players command $9 million. But it's substantial enough to create serious complications. The Canadiens, despite their improvements, aren't exactly flush with cap space. They're a team managing their own young talents, upcoming extensions, trying to build depth, and navigating the same salary cap constraints as everyone else. Fitting Crosby's contract onto their books would require the kind of financial gymnastics that would make a CPA weep. You'd need Pittsburgh to retain salary, which they'd have no incentive to do. You'd need Montreal to move significant pieces out, which would defeat the purpose of adding Crosby in the first place. You'd need the stars to align in ways that simply don't happen in modern NHL transactions. And that's before we even discuss the no-movement clause. Crosby holds every card in this deck. The Penguins can't force him out. Montreal can't force him in. This entire scenario hinges on a player who has shown absolutely zero indication of wanting to leave Pittsburgh, suddenly deciding that now at 38, with 2 years left on his deal, is the perfect time to uproot everything. Here's something that gets criminally overlooked in these trade fantasy scenarios. Sidney Crosby isn't just playing hockey in Pittsburgh. He's playing his hockey in a system built specifically around his strengths, with line mates who've spent years learning to read his movements like a second language. Watch Crosby operate along the boards. Watch how he protects the puck, how he finds Rickard Rakell or Brian Rust in spaces that shouldn't exist. Watch how the Penguins' offensive cycles generate prolonged zone time and high-quality chances. All of it, every single element, is calibrated to Crosby's unique skill set. At 38, Crosby is no longer the explosive end-to-end force of his youth. He's evolved into something arguably more impressive. A cerebral maestro who controls games through positioning anticipation and an almost supernatural hockey IQ. He's maximized efficiency. He's playing the smartest hockey of his career. Now, imagine transplanting that to Montreal. New system, new line mates, new patterns, new tendencies, new everything. That's a young player's game. For someone in the final chapters of their career, that learning curve isn't just steep, it's potentially career-shortening. Why would Crosby voluntarily subject himself to that when he's already in an environment perfectly designed for his success? One of the most persistent narratives fueling these rumors is the idea that Crosby might want one more legitimate shot at a Stanley Cup and that Pittsburgh can no longer provide that opportunity. But is that actually true? The Penguins aren't the powerhouse they were during their 2016 to 2017 championship runs. That's undeniable, but they're far from a lottery team. They remain competitive. They make the playoffs more often than not. And as long as 87 is on the ice, they have a puncher's chance. Hockey is a sport where hot goaltending and timely scoring can transform a wild card team into a champion. Just ask the 2012 Los Angeles Kings or the 2019 St. Louis Blues. The margins are razor thin. One bounce, one save, one moment of magic. Montreal, for all their improvement, isn't a cup contender right now. They're a team on the rise, certainly, but they're still years away from being considered a legitimate threat. If Crosby's motivation were purely about winning one more championship, there would be other destinations that make far more sense. Teams that are one piece away from contention, not teams still laying their foundation. The competitive argument for this move simply doesn't hold water. Let's discuss something that transcends statistics, cap hits, and playoff probabilities: legacy. Sidney Crosby's legacy is already cemented. First ballot Hall of Famer, generational talent, a player who will be mentioned alongside Gretzky, Lemieux, or when historians discuss the game's all-time greats. That's not up for debate, but there's something uniquely powerful about a one-team career. In an era of player movement where superstars change jerseys like fashion accessories, staying with one organization for an entire career has become increasingly rare and increasingly valued. Crosby has the opportunity to join an exclusive club of legends who never wore another NHL uniform. That kind of loyalty resonates not just with fans, but with history itself. It becomes part of the narrative, part of what defines greatness. Throughout his career, Crosby has consistently emphasized his commitment to Pittsburgh. He's taken team-friendly deals to help the organization build around him. He's mentored young players. He's embraced the community. He's become synonymous with the city itself. Walking away from that, even for a franchise as storied as Montreal, would fundamentally alter how his career is remembered. It would add an asterisk to an otherwise perfect story. And for a player as conscious of his place in hockey history as Crosby, that matters. Here's perhaps the most important factor in this entire discussion, and it's one that should end the conversation before it even begins. The Pittsburgh Penguins organization will never, under any circumstances, initiate a conversation about trading Sidney Crosby. It's simply not going to happen. The franchise understands what Crosby means, not just to their on-ice success, but to their brand, their fan base, and their place in hockey history. General managers get fired for making franchise-altering mistakes. trading Sidney Crosby, even if it somehow made sense on paper, would be a fireable offense before the trade call even concluded. The backlash would be nuclear. The fan revolt would be immediate. The organizational damage would be irreparable. So, we're left with a scenario where Crosby would have to request a trade, something he's shown absolutely no inclination to do, identify Montreal as his preferred destination, despite all the complications. The Canadiens would have to perform salary cap sorcery, which may not even be possible, and Pittsburgh would have to reluctantly agree to trade their greatest player in franchise history, which would be organizational suicide. When you lay it out like that, the whole thing sounds less like a realistic possibility and more like a fevered dream concocted during a slow news cycle. Look, I understand the appeal. Trade rumors are entertaining. Imagining Sidney Crosby in a Canadiens jersey, playing in the Bell Centre, adding his name to Montreal's legendary history, it makes for great conversation. It generates clicks. It fills airtime. But sometimes we need to step back and recognize when a rumor is just noise and when it's actually signal. Sidney Crosby signed that contract extension 12 months ago, knowing exactly what he was doing. He wasn't hedging his bets. He wasn't keeping his options open. He was making a statement. I'm finishing my career in Pittsburgh, and that's final. The man has earned the right to control his own destiny, and his destiny is clearly, unequivocally tied to the Penguins. Could some unforeseen circumstance change that? Could there be a scenario so special, so unique, so compelling that Crosby reconsiders? In theory, sure, anything's possible. But betting on that scenario is like betting on a perfect game in baseball. Technically possible, but so unlikely that it's not worth the mental energy. The reality is this: Sidney Crosby will retire as a Pittsburgh Penguin. His number 87 will hang in the rafters. His statue will stand outside the arena. And decades from now, when people talk about the greatest to ever wear the black and gold, his name will be first on the list. That's not speculation. That's certainty. So to all the Montreal fans out there dreaming of Crosby in the blue, blanc et rouge, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's time to wake up. And to Pittsburgh fans losing sleep over these rumors, rest easy. Your captain isn't going anywhere. Now, I want to hear from you. Am I being too dismissive here? Is there any scenario, any at all, where you could see this actually happening? Or is this trade rumor exactly what I think it is? Pure fantasy born from a slow news cycle and wishful thinking? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know if I'm missing something. And if you found this deep dive valuable, if it helped you cut through the noise and see this situation clearly, hit that like button and let me know. These are the conversations that make hockey more than just a game. They're about loyalty, legacy, and what it means to be truly great. Let's keep this discussion going. What aspects of this report structure resonated most with you? The financial breakdown or the legacy discussion?